Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Michael. Michael, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Michael Alicea. I am CHRO of Trellix. I've been in HR and leadership roles for the past 20 years or so. I'm also a public board director of a company called Emerald, symbol EEX on the New York Stock Exchange, and several other nonprofit boards.
Thank you, Michael. Tell me, we're going to talk about distributed work. So tell me what you see as the three or more or less biggest benefits of distributed work. So what are the benefits?
Sure. I mean, it really depends on the type of distributed work, right? Because you have I would guess probably 80% of all companies use the hybrid model, right? Which is, people work mostly at home. They come in maybe to an office a couple of days at work. And then you have a variety of others where, in some cases it's like co-working space. So what the organizations have done is set up offices in different locations and people come to those locations, but it's less of a hybrid. It's more in office, but separated. And then in some cases you have hub and spoke. And of course, that sort of operates differently as well. So for me, the biggest benefits I think is it broadens your talent pool. The ability now to not have geography determine access to certain talent is a really big benefit. I think we underestimate, especially in technical companies like ours. So we're in cybersecurity. We're a pure play technology business. In that situation, it allowed us to branch out from just our main offices, and quite frankly, from a cost perspective, it's you can go to where the talent is and pay market rates at that talent base. So it is helpful from that perspective. I think the second piece, it does allow organizations like mine to optimize our real estate footprint. If you think about the variety of offices that you needed to have in locations so that you could attract talent and have talent come in, that is not the main priority anymore. We could deploy that capital in other places. And then I would say, thirdly, it gives employees flexibility, which gives us also an opportunity perhaps to keep folks longer, right? Because they like the setup. They may have things that are going on in their personal life. And we're able to accommodate it more readily because people can work from anywhere.
Nice. So those are big benefits. You have the job benefit, you have real estate benefit, you have the flexibility benefit. But what are the challenges? Maybe you can also go through the three biggest challenges, frustrations, headaches that you experience with distributed work at Trellix.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I'm going to think more broadly than Trellix, but Trellix as well, right? If I think about where we would have, I wouldn't say issues, but necessarily greater risk in terms of security, heightened security risk. So if you think about the fact that when everyone came to an office, you had a central location that you could have a lot more control over the environment, over what kind of connections people have from a technology perspective. In this new distributed environment, there's heightened security risk, right? Because you're entering into a different network. There's different access points. You don't know who has access to systems and so forth. So it's a little bit, you have to have a little bit more awareness around security. I think the other thing is that for some companies, I think Trellix was always a global business, but for some companies, you have time zone disparities, right? So
Yeah.
understanding how do you manage people over a variety of time zones,
Mhm.
right? So there's a bit of training that goes into that.
Sure.
How do you manage someone that's not in front of you? I have an added problem, which is we have a very robust internship program.
Mhm.
And so, what do you do with those, right? You don't have
Mm.
centralized business hubs, and so how do you get them to buy into your culture? How do
Mm.
you make sure that they're productive, not only for the company but also
Mhm.
for their learning and development?
Yeah.
So these are things that we figured out how to work around, and we manage
Okay.
them by being sort of mindful of the fact that we have
Mhm.
this situation. And I think the third piece, and this is something that companies are just now really starting
Mhm.
to grasp, is there are some complexities around how you deal with compliance, right? So
Mm.
I'll give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
Um, we operate across the globe,
Mhm.
and but we don't have business in every country, and we don't have
Mm.
businesses in every state.
Sure.
And let's say, doctor, you decide that you really like the hybrid model, but you want to work in Maine. I don't have an office in Maine, and I don't have a
Mhm.
tax entity set up in Maine.
Mm.
And but you're originally from sort of New York.
Mhm.
So now I have to worry about sort of what kind of withholding do I have for you?
Uh,
What kind of government mandated funding do I
mhm.
have to have in Maine when I didn't have a payroll function in Maine to
Mhm.
pay or to manage it? Now that is manageable if you think about across the US. There are certain sort of agreements between states, and
Yeah.
we can always figure out a right way to work it. But it gets really complicated if you think about Europe. And the
Mm.
differences between someone working, let's say, in Eastern Europe and Hungary versus the UK, or right? Because now
Yeah.
it's no longer just one EU, right? Because
Okay.
the
Yeah. Sure.
UK is not in the EU, but I've got to figure out what pension scheme do I pay into.
Mhm.
Now, if the person domiciles in Hungary, it's a non-issue, but 99% of the time they just think that they can work wherever they want to work.
Mm.
And in the time frame of a year, they may decide, well, I'm going to do summers in Spain, and who
Mhm.
wouldn't, right?
Sure.
Or winters in Spain, and who wouldn't? And they do summer in Hungary, and now I've got three tax entities I have to deal
Mm.
with. And do they have the legal right to work in country?
Mm.
Right, that's the other
Okay.
situation, right? In the US, that's less of a problem because you can
Sure.
work wherever you want. But generally speaking, if you're coming from a non-EU country into an EU country,
Mm.
there are 90 days usually in which you can work or be in the
Mhm.
country, and then you have to leave. But
Yeah.
sometimes, employees figure out a way around that, and that's a complexity for the organization.
Okay, so that's helpful. So it sounds like the first issue is security, and that's kind of a technical issue. And the last issue is compliance, and that's a technical issue. I want to dive into the culture issue because that's kind of a more soft issue that I think is more central to human resources. Tell me a little bit more about what you do with those more broadly to make sure that people in the company, especially new people, interns, new hires, internalize the company's culture. I mean, I've worked with a number of companies and they've had a number of problems with that. So they work on things like mentoring, they work on things like having meetings, virtual meetings with new people, onboarding programs, but especially those crucial first year. Like, how do you make sure that people internalize company culture?
Well, I think some of the things you mentioned are spot on. Those are the right.
Mm.
Those are some of the right things. But if we start, let's say, from the life cycle, right, from
Mhm.
the time someone joins, or we recruit them, all the way
Yeah.
through let's say they leave the organization.
Mhm.
It starts with making sure that you have a robust onboarding program.
Mhm.
Right. And that onboarding program, when I talk about onboarding, I mean everything from enablement, right, of an employee. Enablement meaning, okay, we sign you up, we hire you, we have to know where to ship your computer. The computer has to be loaded with all the company tools that you need, all the way through. So that's the enablement piece of onboarding, all the way through a really clear, a direct approach to inculcating values, mission, vision, the history, everything that in some cases would come naturally as part of an employee working in an organization. You really have to take that extra step to make sure that employees get that value system, right? What are our values? What do they mean? Why do we pick those and not others? Whereas you might have that in a handbook somewhere, or you might talk about it, but you have to be really mindful and do it up front. And then from the orientation piece, you get to the part of how do you start operationalizing the work that people do, and that's got to be very defined. It can't be loosey goosey. And the problem is that some companies, from a hybrid perspective, they still haven't got the cadence of their own population and how the regular folks end up connecting. So, one of the things that we did is said, hey, when you're on a call, you're on video, right? That's just core, right? We want to see you, we want to interact with you. Not all, I mean, sometimes things happen and you can't be on video, right? That's, I wish I had a dime every time I got on a meeting and something happened where somebody says, well, I can't, my network won't allow me to join. This is the life we live in now, right? Everyone says that. But for the most part, people, you have to join, you have to show video. Secondly, have set, in the case of interns, have a set time every week where it's a staff meeting or what I would call an engagement meeting with the new employee or set of employees in your department, so that they all know that there's a touch point every time, right? Having a way to calendarize things. You have to, again, be a little bit more meaningful and planful, because you just can't say, all right, you see someone in the hall, oh, let's meet for 10 minutes. It's very difficult to do that in this world, right? So those are some of the things. There are a variety of other things that we did. One of the things that we made sure is that we, at least in the first 3 months of someone's employment, we bring them together in some way, shape, or form at a centralized location, because I think nothing builds trust like face to face. And so that's proven to be very successful. We've got great statistics around our internship program. 83% of our interns either come back or get hired on. So that's been very successful. The second side of that, which is interesting, that we didn't talk about, which is not so much about the interns, but like the average employee.
Okay.
Right. So interns are interesting because they have a beginning, a middle, and the program ends, right? So, but you have to have almost the same level of mindfulness for our regular employees, right? With make sure you still have the quarterly check-ins. It's very easy to forget if you've got a big staff, that you have people in all these different places, and the connectivity that you have has to be, again, I'll use the term mindful, to talk about performance, talk about anything that the employee wants to talk about. So it makes what we would call the check-in process much more important, right? Because it's not just hey, come into my office, let's talk about how this works, or maybe an opportunity here. You have to actually plan it out. And then making sure that the performance management component is pretty strong. So you get 4 check-ins, and then once you get a really good performance management discussion. But that doesn't include the fact that you do have to have touch points, every other week for operational things. As you mentioned, we also have a mentorship program that allows us to have secondary connections. The interesting thing about that, and I'm really glad you brought that up, is that when you're in a centralized office of some kind, you have connections with people maybe who sit next to you or adjacent to you that aren't in your department. So you pick up things that are just through natural,
Sure.
conversations where we don't have that when you're separated or only on video, and it's really difficult to just pick up the phone and call someone randomly and say, "Hey, would you be my friend at work?" So this mentorship fills that
Nice.
void, and has become really important to us. And then lastly, we use our ERGs. We have employee resource groups, and the ERGs have become really essential connection points for folks that have an affinity for a certain group or an ally to a certain group. And that has become a great connection because it's one of the ways that we can distribute information, right? Communicate to our members.
Oh, that's excellent. Now, I'm curious, you mentioned something about training before, and I noticed in the clients I help that there's a lot of training that has to go on, especially for managers who are not used to the kind of things that we're talking about here. So it's not only a matter of setting up the systems, but also training managers on how to implement them effectively. I'm curious what you found about some of the challenges that might be involved in training managers to do this new style of work when they've been used to managing by walking around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it actually was a journey because when you join Trellix, after a period of some time, we have what's called a new manager training, a new manager development program. So you're a new manager, these are the things you face, these are the things you need to understand and do. And in the past, we didn't focus so much on schedules or that mindfulness. We focused a lot on motivation. We focus a lot on, how do you think about incentivizing and performance management? So we had to shift a bit so that we talked more about some of the tactical things that you have to do.
Yeah.
Again, this concept of mindfulness where you have to make sure that if you have differences in time zones, that when you set up a meeting, you pick the time that most of the people can join. In our case, in some cases that doesn't work because it may be a 12-hour difference. However, you figure out a way to do it, and maybe one staff meeting one week is this time frame, and next week it's that time frame. So you're not totally impacting one or two individuals that maybe feel disconnected from the group. So that's just an example of some of the evolution of our new manager training and development. Now, the interesting thing is that what we're seeing is that managers who have been managers for a long time instinctually kind of know, some of these key things, but don't know how to put it into a programmatic way. They don't. They know that providing performance guidance and support to an employee is critical, but now they have to figure out how to schedule it. Right? How do you manage it on a schedule? And how do you do it so you put it in the calendar early enough so that it doesn't become something where you're impacting someone's whole day? Because what's happened in this new world is that we've itemized our day, we've scheduled our day out, and it's sometimes difficult to have an ad hoc meeting. So don't have them. Make it a little bit more scheduled out, and you can always have the flexibility to move it as you go out. Now, secondarily to that, there are a new breed of managers that have now lived in this hybrid work model for some time now. We find that they're better equipped, and they are more mindful of the scheduling and all of that stuff, but maybe are not as strong in some of the motivational things that you do. Right? Yeah, like a happy hour at work was something that people used to do quite a bit. Or celebrate birthdays and you have a cake. Those kind of things, which in this new age is less. It doesn't happen naturally. You have to kind of think about it a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, these tactical tools, I think, will be very helpful to the audience. Now, as we finish up, what do you think will happen with the future of distributed work at Trellix, elsewhere, whatever you want to comment on?
Well, I think it's here to stay, first of
Mhm.
all. I think that the pendulum is starting to swing back just a little bit,
Mhm.
so that you're going to see folks, especially less early in their career, want to be in an office and in a
Mhm.
location. It's not only because of sort of the work aspect, but the socialization aspect.
Mm.
And we're seeing that. We're actually seeing it. So if we look at some of our locations,
Mhm.
we notice that, we've tried to mandate it. We've tried to have people come in.
Mhm.
But unless there's a solid reason for them to come in, they
Mm.
won't, except
Yeah.
for that early in career that
Mm.
looks to meet with their friend who's also early in
Mm.
career. So I think you're going to see that we're going to have a hybrid work environment going forward. You're going to see that there are going to be some offices that are going to be built to bring clients in,
Mhm.
and they'll be nicer. They'll have more technology. There'll be landing spots. Because how do you bring an organization together, a team meeting? From a cost perspective, the only way to do that is, you get a hotel or you rent a space.
Mhm.
And I think some companies are investing in that, client spaces
Mhm.
that can also serve a dual purpose and bring teams together.
Excellent, Michael. This has been very helpful. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise.
Awesome. It's great chatting with you. And I appreciate some of the articles slash, blogs that you've been doing. I've been following you.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show.
Thank you.